Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. Decided to go live because this news is pretty fresh, pretty recent about how property owners, including investors and just owner occupiers, will be forced to spend thousands and thousands of pounds to fulfill and support new regulation by the UK government. But it's likely that this will go, very global because it's regulation and laws to do with fighting global climate change. Now, the UK government has gone live and expressed how they're going to be doing this in the UK and how it's going to affect property investors in very very short amount of time. Um, the new laws will come in to effect in less than 3 years, with a very large impact expected in the next year or two. Now, for property owners who are not investing or have not inherited property, or owning multiple properties, these things will actually come. These new regulations will be implemented in a slightly different way. Um, they'll be impacted by the government legislating that each lender must have an average EPC. This is the This is the energy efficiency type rating of band C, which means it's fairly effective energy rating. Now, what that means is a lender like Barclays or NatWest in the UK would mean their whole portfolio must have a certain energy rating. Now, it's very unclear how that will affect property owners. So in this video, I'm going to focus on mostly property investors, because this is going to be much more, it's going to happen quite quickly. It's going to happen in the next year or two, and it's going to come into effect in less than 3 years. Um, so, so what is this? Well, it's to do with the energy efficiency of homes, and in the UK, it's called the Energy Performance Certificate. You can actually pay firms, and they need to be qualified and certified businesses. Not anybody can get one of these analyses, but they're called EPC certificates. And what it does is it kind of gives your property a certification, and it qualifies how well your your property kind of does in terms of energy performance. So I'm going to show you one of these, like a summary of what one kind of looks like now. Give me a moment, I'll share my screen. So you can kind of see how this might look like. It gives you, you'll have the address, the date of the assessment. I think they last for 5 years, the floor space. Here's the energy efficiency, and this is what they're talking about. They want every property in the UK to be energy efficient C. So any investor, I believe, will have each property will need to be C. I don't know if you own many properties, if the average will need to be C. For example, if you own 10, and if 5 were A and the other 5 were D, then maybe the average would be B for the whole portfolio. I don't know if that would count, or if each individual property would need to be level C. That hasn't been confirmed as yet. But anyway, here you can see the energy efficiency ratings, and on the positive side, if you do improve your property, you have more energy efficiency and there's lower running costs. It's better for the environment, but there is quite a lot of cost to this. So it's interestingly, it's linked to obviously the CO2 rating and the environmental impact. I wonder whether they'll expand that to methane, because I believe that's speaking to a chemist. He was saying that methane is actually worse than CO2. I don't know if that's true or not. If there's any scientists or on who are watching this, maybe they can confirm that. But anyway, you've got the energy efficiency on the left and the CO2 rating on the right, and it also breaks down the estimated energy use and the fuel costs. So I want to show you. Yeah. So you need to make sure that you get like a domestic energy assessor, and these are the people that have the certifications to look at this. There are lists that you can go to in England and Wales. I'll click on that in a moment. So there's certain businesses that don't need an EPC. At the moment, this is places of worship, temporary buildings, standalone buildings, which have less than 50 square meters. So that might be garages and things like that. Industrial sites, workshops, and non-residential agricultural buildings. That would be like barns and things like that. I wonder whether if you convert that barn into a residential, it probably would qualify for this EPC. That's something to consider. Some buildings that are due to be demolished, so that's fine as well. Holiday accommodation that's rented out for less than 4 months. That's kind of interesting in terms of investors that are doing rent to rent or serviced accommodation or Airbnb, or is let under a license to occupy. I think that's a special license. So that might be a small amount of people. Listed buildings as well. You need to get advice from your local conservation officer, because of the way that it could change the building's character. And residential buildings intended to be used for less than 4 months a year. I can't imagine what kind of buildings that might be. But anyway, let's have a quick look at an example of the page. This is the government website, and allow it in the UK at least. And this is where you can kind of start now by searching for your postcode, etc. I'm going to do this now because I did this last night, and it's a really good indication of how you do it, and how it gives you an idea of cost as well. I don't know how accurate that is, but let's do this quickly, and let's say it's a house. Let's give a whoopsie. Okie dokie. Let's go back. My bad. Is it going to allow me to go back? No. So for example, if we go to this house, 190 Horns Road in kind of East London, Essex, it has a current energy rating of E. This is valid until 2025. It's Enter Terrace, 84. So it's not too dissimilar from my property in terms of size. And you can see here, that's the current rating, 47. And it would need to get to like 70 roughly, 69 to 80. So they do it in terms of the energy, the EPC rating. It kind of goes from very poor to very good, and that's probably like mirrored here. To be honest, like very poor is probably F and G. Good, I believe, is B and C, and very good, I would imagine, is A. And so this is the rating. It will break down for you the feature of the property, the description, and the current rating. And at the moment, it's assumed because things can be changed. Once you once you get a new rating, for example, or if you've done work, that's why it's important to maybe consider getting a new EPC certified provider to come around and give you a new certification. But anyway, in this current property, not the one I'm sitting in, but on this in this area, they have very poor insulation in the wall. They've got average roof, average for double glazing. They've got good boiler and mains gas, and it gives you all this sorts of details as well. Also gives you the average CO2, A versus G. So I think that's kind of interesting. And this is like how much it would cost, and it breaks it down if you wanted to get your property from an E to a B, in this example from 47 to 84. It's a kind of low B, it's not a high B. So they're saying that the wall insulation would be 4,000 to 14,000, and it wouldn't get you to the sea level, but it'd raise your points by whatever that is, 16, 17 points. Floor insulation is cheaper. That's 800 to 1,200, and it raises you 18 points as well. So that's an interesting thing to look at, and I think property investors over the next year or two will really be looking at this in detail. They'll be thinking about, where can I spend the money to get the most bang for my buck? If you look at this, let's say you get it for £800 for floor insulation on a suspended floor. I'm not sure about the difference between normal floors and suspended, but let's park that for the moment. You can think about, well, it would take about 12 to 13 years to make the money back, because you have a saving of 55. So if it was 12 years, it's about 8 to 10%. It's about 8% return on that cash. We talk about return on capital or return or yield. So if you needed to spend £800, it would take around 12 to 13 years, which is around 6, 7, 8% return, which is not that bad. Whereas if you looked at this and you're spending 5,000 and it's 374, it's slightly more. And especially if you start, and if it's more like 10,000, then 10,000 would take would take many years. Would take about 30 years for this to pay off, which would be about 3%, 2 to 3% return, and plus the outlay is a lot more if it was 10k. Whereas in the middle of here, if it's 1,000, it would take whatever it would take, 15 years or whatever. But either way, it's much cheaper in terms of outlay, and the return is higher as well. So I would be looking at recommendation 2. What about this? This is good as well. It's only 350, and that's about 10%. You get that money back in kind of 11 and a half years. So that's like around 9%, and you get up to 66. So that's awesome. And this is what you need to be doing for yourself. You need to be looking at the total installation cost versus the estimated saving and how high it would get you. So presumably, if you got this, the heating controls and the floor insulation for suspended floor, you might only need to spend 1,500, and you might be able to get up to maybe a C. This is an interesting one. Better boiler with a new condensing boiler. This would get you to C, and you're only spending 2,000 or 3,000. Now, of course, this really does depend on your property. So you'll need to look at this. You can do it by typing in the postcodes, and you can take a look. But you can see here immediately, there's some things that are, will take you immediately to C. It's only one thing. Whoops. It's only one thing. It costs two grand, 2 to 3 grand. If you look at the return, the cost saving, it's 143. So it actually would take you more than 10 years. Would take you about 15 years, something like that. Or if it's 3,000, it would take you roughly 20 years. So at 20 years, it's about 5% return on that cash, if you like, on that investment. But either way, it would, in terms of the ease of doing that work, it might just be one thing. Replacing the boiler is kind of one. We look at solar. That's very expensive. Doesn't save that much money. Does get you to C if you're ethically inclined and you've done all these other things. You might want to consider a solar water heating. These PV panels at the moment are very expensive. 5 to 8,000. I don't know if that actually includes buying the panels. I assume it does, but that gets you up to B. But again, the return you're getting, the saving is actually quite low. If we round that up to £300 and somewhere in the middle, let's say 6k, again, it would take you 20 years to get that money back. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting thing to look at. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing now. 10-15 minutes about how this can impact property investors. Essentially, it will depend on each individual's properties that they have, and it will also depend. Definitely check out the government's website and look at those different line items. You might find that there's something that's only going to cost you 2,000 or 3,000 per property. But in some cases, you might need to do more than one of those. Of course, if it were my property, and I am going to see properties today and this weekend in the Midlands in the UK, I'm going to be thinking about, what needs to be done, and can we do, some things and prioritize the lower cost actions. I think in general, property investors that have portfolios are really going to be looking at this in detail. There's a fine of £5,000. I don't know if it's annual, if there's a kind of time sensitive fine. But I know there's a £5,000 per property that's going to be enforced in less than 3 years from now in 2025. This is going to be all over the news, probably in maybe a year or two. It's going to The first articles are coming out now, which is what's alerted me. Um, but when we think about something that's come out very recently in the investment space for property investors, where you cannot discount mortgage interest costs, that was announced kind of 6 years ago, and it was tapered over about 3 to 4 years. And like a lot of investors only really paid attention in the last 2 years. So if we think about this new regulation about energy efficiency, then we might we might logically assume that investors might not pay attention for another year or two. But anyway, I like to keep on top of these things, on top of these things, abreast of new regulations and changes whenever I can. If you like these videos, I enjoy making them, of course. Make sure to like. If you think that this would be helpful for you or anyone, friends and family, or other investors that you know of, make sure to share the video if you can. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. Remember that knowledge is power, especially the right kind of knowledge. The more you know, the more you can grow. The more you learn, I find, the more you can earn. And of course, knowledge is power and progress is everything. I'll see you guys in another video. Take care.